Today, I'm super excited to have Landon Sanford on the podcast. Landon is a serial entrepreneur, and he's made a couple ventures now in the past, which have raised from the likes of Craft Ventures, YC, and Sequoia. He also had a brief stint doing strategy at Google, and has been part of programs such as Launch House, Future Founders, and On Deck. He is currently working on his startup, Arwen, which is focused on delivering a new social work platform to the market. We had a great conversation about the lessons he's learned from doing all these experiences and some of the strategy that now he takes in order to set up a groundwork for a new venture. Super interesting conversation, and I hope you guys enjoy. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Building Blocks Podcast. Today, I have Landon. Landon, thank you so much for coming onto the podcast. And yeah, let's get into it. So, can you talk a little bit about yourself and what got you into entrepreneurship?
Yeah, definitely. No, thanks for having me on. Excited to chat about everything. I guess about myself. From Charleston, went to Vandy, did a startup, then worked a big corporate company, then I've done startups since then, and also into surfing and traveling and kiteboarding and yeah, happy to dive into anything more specific, but that's the kind of short 30-second overview.
Yeah, I know, and then so I stumbled onto you. I think you had a LinkedIn post talking about all the different startups that you started. I think you've had what, nine now, or seven or nine?
Working on number nine. I don't know. Some of it kind of blends in terms of like stuff I've raised money on, stuff I've built team on. Like it's I don't know the exact number, but I've just been launching a bunch of stuff.
Yeah,
And so working on the next one right now.
yeah, that was super impressive to me how you've kept with it. You've kept a lot of people I think would have moved on. So it was just super impressive to see you keep going at it. So I just wanted to sort of have that conversation. So I guess starting from the beginning, what got you into startups? What got into entrepreneurship, and what was the motivating factor there?
Yeah, I'd say a few things, and I don't know if it was like some kind of clear, definitive moment. I guess I started my first company in high school. I lived on a beach in Charleston called Sullivan's Island, and every summer the weekends would be packed with people. So my friend and I, on the front of our golf carts, put signs that said "Beach and back, shuttle service, tips accepted." And we just drove people to and from the beach, and I really liked it. But then when I went to Vanderbilt, I kind of started getting a little bit more streamlined into the banking consulting kind of path, and I did a summer investment banking in New York, and I didn't like it, and eventually I guess kind of switched more to back to startups and went from there. But like even like during like I switched my major a bunch of times. I ended up studying political science, which I haven't used. So I didn't know what I wanted to do for a while. Like I was kind of a bit all over the place. And then only when I graduated college, I actually didn't have a job lined up, and I was recovering on just at my mom's house from double knee surgery for 8 months. So I had 8 months without a job, and I said I've got to start something, um, and that was it. So I ended up coming with my up for an idea for my first startup then while I was still in recovery. I eventually raised about 1.5 million for it, and then kind of went from there. But I enjoy it. I guess like that's another aspect is like I think I really enjoy the process of startups, and I really find it fun, both the creativity, the variety, and just the potential for them to become something. So that's kind of what led me more and more into the path. Was it just felt like fun, but also felt like something that was just a great kind of route too.
hmm And I think like there's so much to tackle. So like how do you prioritize what to go, what to tackle, like what problems to choose and make your startup around?
Yeah, this is one that I feel like I've heard kind of two different camps on this. One is like just keep throwing stuff at the wall and see what sticks. There's a great article from the founder of Run the World where she left Stanford Business School, and I think every month launched something, and then her eighth thing, or like her eighth or ninth month, was Run the World, and she raised 40 million on that. But talked about just kind of creating her own luck with that. But then I've also heard this other school of camp where it's pretty much um, see what ideas and spaces just keep coming back to you. In terms of like a startup might at the end of the day be become a 10-year thing. ideally, if things go well. So really, what do you care about? What are you passionate about? What do you like really want to solve and see in the world? And maybe that involves just traveling and seeing what keeps coming back or taking time. I've heard Naval Ravikant kind of approaches things in that kind of way in terms of you can't rush the process. So I'd say from where I am now, my first startup was very much on like the passion kind of side of things, where I was really passionate about the
Mhm.
problem, and there were multiple times where it should have shut down, but I just kept going with it, and then kind of swung more into the like throwing stuff at the wall and kind of being a bit all over the place. And then now probably swinging back either somewhere in the middle or somewhere more on the side of really thinking through what can I see myself working for on a decade, on.
Right. Right. So you have an idea, and you start formulating it. You think you have a product to solve a problem. How do you go about starting? I think that's something that I really struggle with as well. I have all these ideas for starting different ventures, but getting that first footing is always really tough. So I'd love to hear from you. How do you get started on things?
Yeah, it's I think it's one that's I mean I think starting is the hardest part, but I think it's also, I mean, there's just so many different ways to go about it. I used to think you had to be a coder. I used to think you had to just start coding and building right away. I'm not a programmer, so now I think that's actually benefit in terms of like ideally you sell then build. You ideally get some traction or sell the ghost first and try to validate something before moving forward. I also think there's a misconception with startups that um, you need some kind of like light bulb moment in order to start. When really, I think like the light bulb moment is more of like I want to be an entrepreneur, and then after that comes like the process of thinking through ideas and launching things. And even if there is a light bulb moment after that, it's usually the decision to be an entrepreneur. Even if you're like a full time job, like I think there's a lot you can do on the side of those jobs on weekends and things like that. Um, so I think just as part of that, like I think that's kind of an aspect of this too. It's just like starting something is tough, and it feels like you need all the stars to align for either to like quit your job and go for something, or even if you're like starting on something on the side. But usually it's a bit easier than that, I feel like, and that's usually just the hardest part. It's just kind of getting going.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so I know you made a couple startups and you decided to take the corporate route at Google for a bit. So I was just wondering, what was sort of the decision making process there? What led you to go to corporate strategy, and in general, like what do you think the biggest differences are?
Yeah, there a lot of differences, and probably a lot of differences even between different companies and different types of startups and things like that. Um, for me, for my first startup, I made a lot of first time founder mistakes. I
Mm-hmm.
overhired too quickly. I think the space and industry I was focused on, which was it was like a social travel app. Like I don't think it was that different from a lot of other things out there, and got caught into just like feature creep and needle moving type. And basically over the course of time, felt like we were just kind of going in circles. And so I was pretty burnt out on it by the time we are kind of running out of money with that. It was a longer story there in terms of it ended up my co-founder offering to put in more money if he became CEO and I became an advisor. And
Mm-hmm.
I said yes to that. So I became an advisor and I ended up working at Google. Um, and Google was great. It was a great company, but I think part of it is also like even though the startup that I worked on failed, and even though that it was just really high highs and really low lows and kind of ups and downs, I still find it like very exciting, and I still found it like uh, very challenging in a good way. So there's a quote from Naval Ravikant that says, "Once you've had a taste of freedom, it can make a person unemployable." And I think I felt that at Google. Where like even a week or two in, like I still felt like my 20 years were my best time to take risks and my best time to just like start stuff. And Google, I think with a lot of corporate jobs where you start on the ground floor, a lot of it can be, you just in a lot of ways kind of told what to do and then you do it, and less so the startup where you're just trying to figure everything out and you're wearing a ton of different hats.
Right.
That's an exaggeration, but like that's kind of like how I felt in terms of I missed the excitement and just even the potential that startups offered.
Yeah, and so I think I think a lot of people feel like you get some big tech experience and then transition to startups or vice versa. So I was just wondering, like from that perspective, do you think there's a lot of similarities there, or do you think you should stick to one field? Like if you want to go to big tech, stick to big tech. If you want to go to startups, go straight in and dive in.
I Yeah, I think I would probably right now lean on more of this like dive into startups. That could change, and with anything I'm saying, take it all with a grain of salt because I haven't succeeded with the startup. So hopefully 5 years from now, I'm looking back on what I'm saying right now and being like, well, I didn't know anything about startups by then. But I do think that like you just learn more by being in it. And I used
Mhm.
to think that like to be a founder, you needed some sort of next level or some sort like you did need to work 2 hours at a big company or 2 hours 2 years at a big company or 2 years at a fast growing startup and like learn the ropes before you dive in. But I do think you learn a lot just by diving in, and I think there's plenty of people that have done that. So I'd say the other risk of like a big company is the golden handcuffs, and it can be very very tough to leave. Even when I quit Google, I was amazed. I probably had 15 people reach out saying like, "How'd you do it? Like, what was the like? I've always wanted to do my own startup, but like I've been here 6 years. Like, how what was your key to leaving?" And that's not to say. I mean, there are plenty of people who just love their time there, and totally great path there. And um, I think it depends for the person, but in general, I'd say like you learn most by just doing and getting out there, and that's part of also with what I'm doing now is even actually a kind of mentor person at Sequoia said like start you just keep starting stuff. You get better with each launch. You get better with each process. You get better at like raising money and building a team, and it's just like the amount of times until one works. And I think spending too much time at a corporate company or these other things are building experiences that are good and provide value, but maybe less than just kind of learning just by doing directly.
Right. And so going back to you deciding to quit Google, was there like a definitive moment there where you felt like, I think I want to go back into startups, or was it just like, oh, gradually over time, working at Google, working big tech for a while, you just missed startups?
It was kind of a mix. I'd say like even within my first week or two, like I missed startups pretty quickly, and I also I think I left after 6 or 7 months, and I wish that I'd given it either a more full shot and like been there a year or like left like right away. In terms of like I started working like relatively quickly on stuff on the side and other kind of startup projects, and I think that the people that I worked with at Google, like I had an impact on them in terms of like me quitting, put a lot of more work on some of the people that I left, kind of like hanging out to dry, and they spent a lot of time trusting in me and just even hiring me. And so part of me just wishes that I'd gone about that in a different way. In terms of like I probably should have left earlier. In terms of like I think I
Mhm.
knew pretty quickly that I was missing startups, but more concretely, I ended up working with this guy. Gagan Biani, who co-founded Udemy, and ended up kind of working with him for a bit, and then eventually worked on my own startup. Um, uh, I probably like a month after leaving Google and got into YC with that, and that was another just kind of catalyst was moving forward with that.
Right. Right. And okay, cool. I think like what's really cool about Google or a lot of these companies is they have a very specific product building philosophy. And so I was just wondering, when it comes to that, like is that a similar approach to what you take to when building products, or do you think you have your own distinct product philosophy compared to what Google has?
I think I have my own process, but I think I didn't learn some of the core kind of fundamentals at Google in terms of like I think it was a misalignment of roles in terms of I was on some kind of like mobile apps kind of ads sales team on the strategy side of things where I think I should have been more on the product management side of things and learning more skills there or something
Mhm.
more specific to startups. In terms of it felt like a lot of what I learned was very specific to Google in terms of skills and things that were not necessarily transferable in a lot of ways, and a lot of like knowledge that was Google specific. There are definitely some things from a team standpoint, from a organization standpoint that I thought were really great to learn. I think that was the best boss I've ever had, and hopefully will have because I hopefully don't want to have another boss in terms of I want to keep starting stuff. But I thought she was just incredible in terms of like the way she led the team and just empowered people. So a lot of great aspects, but I'd say in terms of like the specifics of what I learned as it relates to starting startups wasn't necessarily from there in terms of there's also a lot of like bureaucracy and red tape and slow moving pieces that I found incredibly frustrating compared to coming right from a startup background where everything just changed even like on a weekly basis.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Makes sense. And when it comes to like finding a co-founder, finding people to work on a startup with, uh, what has been your process in trying to find people to work with stuff on?
I haven't found a formula to this. So if you find one, if you talk to someone, let me know, because this I feel like this is one of the most important like aspects in terms of, they say startups don't die from murder, they die from suicide. They die from internal conflicts or issues coming about and not being able to fix them or solve them. Um, my first startup, I felt like it was a great team. The team got along well, but maybe the market was, not the best market to play in, and we probably should have shifted things a bit pretty quickly. My second startup felt like the opposite. It felt like a great market. We raised money from YC and Sequoia and Craft, but the team dynamics weren't fully there in terms of we probably should have had some earlier conversations tied to like high level kind of what we were thinking and the vision and goals and mission for the company and things like that. I From what I've heard, ideally it's based on friends. Ideally, it's based on people you've worked with in the past. But even with my startup now, like I find it just a very challenging kind of process in terms of like it's really tough to know after like a couple of Zoom calls if you want to spend 10 years working on something with someone. We're trying to do working trials. We're trying some other things, but it's tricky. It's tricky to know what someone's like, even just from some conversations. And even when working with someone, there's plenty of co-founder dynamics I've had where like it starts out great, and then either the concept shifts or things and different things come up that reveal more just about the dynamic. So I hear it kind of equated to dating a lot. Like even right now, like I think I'm slow in the co-founder process because it's like I came from a bad breakup where my last co-founder relationship kind of didn't fully work out. So short answer is I don't have a solution on this, and I'm still trying to learn. But I found like On Deck and White Combinator and some of these different groups and communities have been great so far in terms of just meeting, connect with people, and at least getting some stuff kind of and even initial conversations started.
Yeah, like in some ways, like you mentioned, you might be spending more time with your co-founder than somebody like you're in a potential relationship with, just because of how much time you need to invest in a startup.
Right.
Uh,
Exactly.
so that's yeah, I mean that's really interesting to hear, and I think yeah, I mean that's something for me. Like when I think about going about creating something, obviously I have my vision, but finding somebody to align that vision with is so tough.
Right.
Um, and so for you, when it comes to that, first of all, how do you go about documenting your vision, or trying to put that idea into paper and then getting people on board?
Yeah. It's I found a challenge, like even as it ties to like vision, like I've found like the vision can very much tie to the idea, and that can shift or change, particularly the earlier the stage of the startup. So I've tried to align first more so on values and more so on a commonality, just from like a high level company standpoint, regardless of the space industry thing like that, and that definitely ties to vision too. But I'd say like that's been a kind of a learning lesson where I feel like on some of these kind of co-founder things where or even conversations where we're trying to determine if something might work out, a lot of it dives much more into ideas or into specifics of the industry, things like that, and that can change. Most startups do kind of change or evolve over time, so I've been trying to lean it more into just kind of like high level. Okay, from a company standpoint, what do we want, and what's this look like, and even from a culture standpoint, like I think if you can find agreement and just alignment there, then even as the idea changes or evolves over time, that kind of foundation is solid.
Hmm. And when it comes to like taking in inputs for the vision, I know some founders are very like, no, we're doing it like this, and they don't take no for an answer, and sometimes that leads in a lot of disagreements, and it can lead to company failures, but sometimes it can also lead to success. So when it comes to taking inputs into the vision and as it morphs along, what's sort of your thought process around that?
Yeah, it's that's definitely another one that I've not figured out in terms of right now. My most recent thing I raised kind of more in a thesis. So right now it's like we've been launching different things within this thesis. So it feels like we're constantly changing a ton or throwing away kind of stuff where it's probably different than if we had something just more grounded and aiming to spend the next 10 years on that. In terms of like we're very much still in the exploration and brainstorming kind of mode with some of the stuff we're working on. So I don't know. I feel like some of that depends. Like I've heard different things from different founders. Where some of them it's very specific, versus some it kind of changes or it's flexible to change based on the team or external factors. I think with any like entrepreneur, like that's just a constant question. Is like the pivot versus persevere kind of question that is like at any stage of the company, like at any stage of the startup, there's like always that question of like, okay, is this good, or should we go in this direction? And I think the stronger the vision, or even the more conviction the person or the founder has in that vision, the more that that's kind of like less of a question, and more kind of just materialized. So um, yeah, another one where it's still very much, I think, depend on the founder and concept, but a lot of ways to go about it.
Right. And so when you have like that initial idea, how do you go about, of course, achieving product market fit is one thing, but how do you go about validating that idea, trying to gather insight and seeing, is this something should I pursue for the, like, for a decade or not?
Yeah, it's I'd say like there's a few different factors. I've obvious one. I mean, is this like passion and excitement and problem in terms of like, is it a personal problem you face or something like that? I've gone through some recent things that I looked good, like they looked good on paper, but I just realized like after working on it for a couple of weeks or something, I just wasn't excited about it. And you need that in order to like sustain yourself for 10 years of, or even just through like any sort of, it's going to have challenges, it's going to have hard moments, and you've got to have some kind of conviction in order to sustain through those. So I'd say that's one area. Another is this market in terms of I'm a much bigger fan now of like the Mike Maples school of thought on viewing venture backed entrepreneurship more as like time travel, of more of like viewing the future 5 years from now, coming back to the present, building up for that future, where there's a lot more white space, a lot more room for differentiation, where it can be really tough to like to create something different if it's not in a market that's either growing or about to be growing quickly. Mainly for I mean, there's plenty of bootstrapped kind of companies that might not follow that, but for venture backed entrepreneurship, I view that as much more and more important. Um, that'd be one area, and I'd say like even with my first startup, like I was very passionate about it, but I think that market kind of element wasn't fully there. So I think it's like one of those kind of like what Venn diagram or whatever, where it's like a mix of different factors, where it's like passion and personal pain point and conviction mixed with market and things like that, and then also like the ease to either I guess validate something, or even just like your ability to execute it. Like I might have like a great idea for some kind of like rocket thing, but I'm not Elon Musk. So some of it's just kind of a mixture of these different factors, and the right exact blend of them. It's another one where it might depend on the person, but it's one that I haven't cracked yet in terms of, I think I've leaned too much on this like market where it kind of is a little bit of like the grass is greener, or kind of like chasing after just whatever's hot right now, or too much on the passion side of things, where it kind of blind to maybe the pitfalls on the business or concept itself. I'm a now bigger fan of the, what is it, the Build the Right It. I'm blanking on who does the talk in the book, but there's a book called Build the Right It, and really just kind of like trying to validate concepts, based on just getting them to pay, in terms of really trying to sell it before building it is pretty obvious, kind of like first step. Very clear if it's B2B, but even B2C, there's usually some ways about it. So I'm trying to lean more in that direction too.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And and yeah, like, so when you go about building an idea, you start the groundwork, and you start building an MVP. At what point, like, I think, it's really important to know at what point to cut it off, and start going, raising your seed round, and getting more, some more validation there. So at what point do you cut it off, where you're like, okay, this is our MVP, this is the product we're gonna, go to venture capital with, or go to our customers with, and try to get feedback from, and then go from there.
Yeah. So I guess I first try to I first try to get traction on it, or some sort of validation on it before deciding further. I guess even before that, like I look into just like the competitive market. I try to see what's out there. A lot of other people who are founders know that moment of like, oh, you have an idea you're excited about, and then you look online and it's been done 10 times. So that
Right.
that happens plenty of the times. But if I do think there's a gap, I'll keep kind of like diving into it, and then eventually, uh, yeah, like try to just get some traction on it before building it. So the best example I have of this is with Compose AI, which was the startup that we did that went through YC and raised some money from Sequoia. We kind of like built this website and launched it on Product Hunt. We got like maybe 3,000 or 4,000 on the wait list. Before really building anything, we kind of had a demo, but we hadn't really built, and it was more of just like a sign that like people wanted it. And when we got into YC, pretty much just based on the traction from that, as well as like the team and things like that. That's kind of like one aspect, like one route. There's like, I think it depends. Like if you're B2B, just trying to talk to like actual businesses and see the problems. If it's something like a social app, that might be tougher, or if it's a marketplace, you might need to only focus on one side of the marketplace. So some, it depends on the business, but usually just trying to get some sort of traction and validation first. I'd say like another easy mistake, that first time founders mistakes, is like leaning too much on friends and family. And I was guilty of this. Like there's a great book called The Mom Test, where we're pretty much, instead of saying like, okay, what do you think of this idea? What do you think of this idea to friends or family, or to your mom, or to anyone, instead asking like open-ended questions and really trying to like get a sense of like the problem and of how they currently solve it, and how deep of a problem it is. So I try to lean on that too. In terms of like determining whether to move forward with it or not, some of it just depends on both the specifics of the hypothesis test, and like the launch, or the conversations, or the sit, whatever it might look like, depending on the concept, as well as the excitement level. And just like startups are kind of like an onion, in terms of like you just keep peeling it, and you learn more and more about the space, and about the industry, and different things like that. So some of it's just like, as you dive deeper, you kind of like learn more about it, as well as about yourself, in terms of like how excited you are about it and things like that. I really like I mentioned working with Goggin Beyond. He has a great article on this called Minimum Viable Testing on First Round, and I'd highly recommend it, in terms of like it's a great kind of distillation of how to think through startup ideas, and how to distill them into concrete hypotheses to test, and then go forward from there.
Mm-hmm. I think one thing that's super interesting that you mentioned there is like just being able to see that excitement and keep it. And I think that's something that's been a little bit challenging for me, where, I have an idea, I'm super passionate about it, I'm super excited about it, and I'll start working on it. And, a week will pass by, a day will pass by, still really excited. A week will pass by, still excited. But then, as time goes on, I sort of lose that passion, that excitement, and I'm sort of back to square one. So I was just wondering, in terms of how do you keep that excitement, and how do you keep that initial excitement going through, like throughout time?
Yeah, I'd say my thinking here has probably evolved, in terms of I now a founder of a pretty big company told me, like, people overemphasize kind of passion and stuff like that, because it kind of puts people, it kind of leads people down the similar paths. Whereas if you have something that's like killing it or doing it, like, you're going to become passionate about it. And so his example is like, he had someone who was doing some kind of garbage business or something like that, which he obviously wasn't super passionate about garbage, but they were crushing it. And he said like he was having a blast doing it. And I think I lean more in that direction, in terms of like I mentioned my first startup was like a travel kind of app, and I always talk about, I'm passionate about travel, and that's what led to this. But like, who isn't passionate about travel? Like, everyone loves traveling. Like, if that's like an obvious kind of one, and that's why I think we see a lot of like travel apps or babysitting, nannying kind of like things related to personal pain points. Like, I don't know. I think that you'll get more passionate or excited about something if it does succeed, if it doesn't work out. But the actual like knowledge of the business and the industry, a lot of that might come from personal, past experience, past expertise in a certain realm, and that also might yield to more kind of like passionate conviction, in terms of like how real of a problem it is, versus like Googling and like thinking it's a problem, but it's actually not a problem. So I'd say that's kind of like probably how my thinking has evolved on it.
No, it makes sense. Yeah. But I think, what's really interesting is sometimes you won't get recognition or feel that success for a while.
Right.
And so I guess you just have to have enough conviction to keep going with it, or eventually just start tapering off.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's another one where it's just like tough to, and there are probably different examples and different, different sides of that, people who, just like kept pushing through. You hear the stories of like the Airbnb founders where they were maxed out on credit cards with binders full of just maxed out credit cards, but they were just so convicted, versus others where maybe they had 20 pivots or just various different things that are before something clicked. So I think some of it depends.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. Yeah. And I think, starting something from the ground up is pretty exhausting. So I was wondering
Yeah.
for yourself, like, how do you keep motivated? How do you keep motivated when you do start something, new from the ground up?
Yeah, it's I'd say this one, like this question, I think is more idea specific in terms of like there are ideas that I've started where I just it seemed like it was going to be a tougher route, or I wasn't excited about it, or whatever it might be. But I think the actual process of starting startups is still fun um, compared to other jobs that I've done in the past. In terms of like it's still starting from the ground up, and so um, uh, more highs and more lows, and that kind of like infamous entrepreneur graph of like moments where you think like, okay, this is going to be huge, and other moments you think like, this is so dumb, like what am I doing? I felt that full range of emotions, but I'd say like part of what sustains me is like I do think it's fun, and I do enjoy the process, and even if one doesn't hit, like I do enjoy it. um that's one aspect. I'd say another part of what asks like what I guess what energizes or motivates me or keeps me going is like I think my view of failure is different than most people in terms of like I view regret as the bigger fear than failure. And part of this was like I talked with a bunch of senior citizens and did this podcast talking with senior citizens and terminal illness patients and things like that. And that even just some of those like in-person conversations like had a big impact on me where people talking about their past and about what they would have done differently. um, and I think that had just kind of like shaped some of my decisions in terms of how I've gone about things. I also think I mentioned 20s and being a great time to start stuff. Like there's very little downside. Where when I graduated college, I applied to Google. I didn't get into Google, and then I failed in a startup, and then I got into Google after that. Like I think failures you still learn a lot through the process. You still lead people, especially if you get one, either making money or going. Like you still learn a lot through the process. So I would say that, particularly with startups, I think the average entrepreneur like fails like 3.4 times before success or something like that. So it's one of those where it's a unique industry where I think it's accepted and it's fine. So I'd say that's another aspect is like part of what motivates me is like I feel like I'm learning a lot, and I still feel like I'm learning a lot. And so even though I've been through a lot of failures, I feel like every one I feel closer. I feel like, oh, this is the one, and
Hmm.
I think that's part of what motivates me is like seeing how much I've learned and how much I've changed, and realizing that potential is still there.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I think like even for me, I'm what 23, and I already have regrets in my life. So I can't imagine at a certain age, it's like why didn't I take those steps? Why didn't I take that risk? And so at least knowing that, hey, at least I tried doing it. I think that's a big deal itself. So no, it makes a lot of sense. I think, I guess in a related way, risk is such a important thing with a startup, like being able to take a risk and starting it, but even when you're in a startup, taking a risk and pivoting or just making certain decisions. So how do you manage your relationship with risk, and how do you make sure, like, how do you calculate, okay, should I take this decision or not based on the risk?
Yeah, that's a tricky one. I think I think some of it depends in terms of like the stage, like some of that like could be broken in terms of like the actual, like if you're in a job in terms of like deciding whether or not to take the risk and do a startup or not, or there's like probably 100 more even just risks within a startup in terms of like once you do start something, do we hire this person or not? Like that's a risk in terms of like that, that's a cost, and that shortens our runway. Or do we go in this direction, but that might take 3 months, and that's that. I mean, there's just so many different both risks and opportunity costs of things you could be doing, instead. And um, I don't know. I don't know. I don't think I have like a specific kind of like formula or approach on it. I think that Yeah, like in the end, so the bigger risk would not be trying and looking back and like wonder if I played it too safe and like that's still a risk that I don't want. But there's also like I don't know, plenty of other factors in terms of like um, family and friends, and even just like like I was fortunate that I didn't have student loans, and I think my risk appetite might be totally different if I had like a ton of student loans or something like that, or from if I'm single and don't have kids. Like I think my risk appetite might change completely if I suddenly
Right.
have a family to provide for and things like that. So I think a lot of it might be situational in terms of like where you're at, both financially but also relationally. Um, and so that's something that I think kind of evolves over time.
Hmm. No, that makes a lot of sense. I guess. Yeah, I guess your whole worldview just evolves over time as well, right? So yeah, it depends on the situation and your experience as well. You might be taking a big risk that a lot of people see as a big risk, but because you have that experience or you have some insight, that it's not as big a risk as people think. So that makes
Right.
a lot of sense. I guess, yeah, moving on a little bit. You've been part of YC, On Deck, Future Founders, Sequoia, and a lot of other programs. So I was just wondering, what was the motivation in joining those, and in terms of establishing a network within those and getting lessons, what were some of the big ones you saw there?
Yeah, I would say when I first started getting into startups, like I think I underestimated how valuable and important community is in terms of. I think it has a huge impact. Just being around other founders, entrepreneurs, just being able to like bounce ideas off of them, being able to like talk openly about mental health or about things you might be going through or about challenges you're facing. Um, I think it's vital. I mentioned, yeah, I'm from Charleston, so like my first few years of my startup journey were in Charleston, and I didn't see anything wrong with that. And part of that was I was recovering from a knee injury, and I was kind of forced there. But I I didn't think I needed to move out to San Francisco. And I think if I did it over, I would have moved to San Francisco pretty quickly or New York or something like that, because I do think those communities like, really have a big impact, both on meeting other co-founders, but also those different factors I mentioned. So for me, I guess like the first kind of dip into this was on deck, as well as just Google and that community, and then YC and some of these other ones too, just have had a huge impact. And so I just think it's really important, especially if you're working remotely or something like that, where you're just kind of like in that environment of other people, and it's a little bit less just kind of in your head or something like that. Like especially like work remotely, if you're just from a coffee shop or home all day, like there's an impact in terms of like just being around other founders. I'd say there's also an extreme to that where like you might spend way too much time going to networking events and conference events and stuff like that don't really push your startup forward at all,
Hmm.
or it's an excuse to network or things like that when you might not need a network. You might need to just put your head down and and solve something. So there's probably some kind of happy medium there, but in general I'd say like having some sort of community, particularly of other founders or people who've gone through it or going through it at the same time, is it's just super important.
Hmm. I think one interesting aspect there though is like it can feel really daunting to find these communities and to join them, and I know for myself one of the things I've grappled with is imposter syndrome to a degree as well,
Mm.
where it feels like everybody knows what they're doing, and as time has gone on, I've started to realize that people know what they're doing, but at the same time their situations aren't as different as you think. But I was just wondering, when it comes to that, when it comes to overcoming that imposter syndrome and that feeling of it being daunting, do you have any advice or any stories that you have to share from that?
No, I think it's a great point though, and a great like topic, just because I feel like every time I get on like LinkedIn or I've recently gone on Twitter, I can get discouraged pretty quickly in terms of like you just see so many funding announcements or great news or some 18-year-old raising 3 trillion or whatever, and you just feel like
Yep.
like I feel like I'm working hard. Like what what's the disparity here? What am I doing wrong? And you can just get down on yourself. So I think that's also part of like why I wanted to maybe share about my failures and stuff like that, is just because I think it's both easy to see just only positive news and only good stuff and not the hardships that go through, of going through startup or stuff like that. But even like yeah, even with friends and stuff like that, and founder friends, like you just get asked constantly as as a founder, like how's the startup going, like what, and all you want to tell them is like good news, and you want, oh, we're killing it, we're crushing it, like we just, three x or whatever, like we just hired 10 people, like it is so hard, both conversationally and also like online, to not want that, not have that be the case. And so I'd say like part of it's just our human nature in terms of like we we want things to go well and stuff like that. But it's yeah, I think that like um I think that also ties back to the importance of community. Is like when you do have some founder friends, you realize, oh, maybe that like shiny surface of like what I thought their startup journey was like is not as shiny as I thought, now that we're having these raw conversations about it. So I think that kind of like vulnerability on intimacy at some kind of level is just like really necessary, just for kind of bringing everything back down to earth.
No, yeah, I think that's something that we don't get to see, like that peek behind the curtain. Because if you're on
Right.
LinkedIn or Twitter, you'll just see, oh, I raised from this venture, or whatever the
Right.
case is. You'll just see their successes, which makes sense. I mean, that's what those platforms are made for.
Right.
A lot of people there don't share, failures or more intimate thoughts. But I guess having that community aspect is so valuable, because you can see behind the curtain and see the back. Like, people don't see all the hard work and all the everything that went behind that funding announcement. They just see that funding announcement. They're like, oh, why can't that be me? Or I
Yeah.
can't get that. So that's super interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I totally agree.
hmm So I guess, moving on a little bit more, what's a field that excites you right now? So I know you're working on Arwen, but in general, like, what's a really exciting field for you?
Yeah, this is the short answer is like I still think Web3 is exciting. Like even in spite of the kind of recent trends and declines over the past couple months, which it's September 2020 right now. I guess the spring things took a hit, but I've just seen so many people move into that space and so many people raise money in that space that I think there's going to be still a lot of innovation there. And it could be a year or two before we start seeing some of that innovation, but I think there will be a lot of practicality there. Another one, augmented reality, in terms of like I from what I've heard, like Apple and some of these other companies are going to announce some of their AR glasses soon, and I think that's one that could just totally change things very quickly.
Yeah.
AI was one that I've had plenty of experience in terms of starting something that was initially GDP3, and then eventually we built our own AI model, but that is still there's just a ton of innovation there. So there, I mean, there's just a lot going on and a lot of exciting stuff. So it's plenty of places to look.
Yeah, I think you're talking about one of those fields like Web3. To me right now, like, there's so many companies, so much investment, and there's a lot of exciting stuff on there. But as of right now, and just to speak frankly, it just sort of feels like people are throwing shit at the wall and seeing what sticks. It's
Yeah.
like we have like there's no doubt there's a lot of potential in the technology, but for me, I just haven't seen, or it's tough for me to see companies where it's like consumers would rather choose this product versus the product they're already using. And I'll give you an example. Like, a lot of Web3 products are aiming, to make the Web3 alternative to the Web2 alternative.
Yeah.
And I see that. Like, I see the reason to do that, especially like from privacy. But you know, I still haven't seen a company which I've seen enough reason for somebody to shift over from Web2 to the Web3 alternative. And so, yeah, I think that's super interesting. I guess for you, like, when it comes to Web3, like, do you share similar thoughts? And for people who might be more skeptical on Web3, what do you think you would share for them or share to them?
Yeah, I think your observation right there is spot on in terms of like that's actually what I raised money on in terms of back in January. I mentioned raising more on a thesis, and the thesis was like a lot of the Web3 social platforms that I've seen are just clones and copycats of existing platforms. Like I've
Yeah,
seen a tokenized slash crypto version of like Facebook and Instagram and TikTok and YouTube and Twitter, and I don't think that's enough to overcome network effects. I don't think anyone's going to switch from like Instagram to like a crypto version of Instagram just because of whatever reason.
yeah,
I think it needs to be differentiated, and I view tokens as more of a post product market fit thing, where if something's not being used or something's not providing value or something, like adding tokens to it doesn't suddenly change that. It doesn't make it suddenly want to be used or fix things. And I think that's been the issues, or one of the issues is like I think that like a lot of the playbook for just starting startups has kind of been thrown out the window, and it's like on some of these where it's more just like you mentioned, like copycats or clones or just
Yeah.
whatever that I don't think is different enough. So that's um, kind of some of what I've been working on is trying to create something differentiated first, and then if it is differentiated and if we can get to product market fit, then viewing tokens is just a better way to strengthen the community, and a better way to kind of like strengthen those network effects, and better reward and let the community sharing the upside through the issuance of token. I think it's still all got a long way to go. Like a lot of the Web3 that I've platforms and products I've seen, like just the user interface is really poor. The onboarding and the structure, like a lot of it is still feels poor. In addition to like security and things like that. So I definitely think it's early. I think there's going to be a lot of changes across a lot of realms as it relates to Web3, but I'm still hopeful on it all, very much so.
100%. Yeah, I think like a good example of that in a completely different industry, but of the same nature is like, for example, with Tesla. They made electric vehicles, sure, but that wasn't the reason they sold their car. They sold their cars because of technology and all the benefits that came with the
Right.
vehicle. And then the EV, the EV was like sort of a EV technology had a net benefit from that. And I think that's what's missing in Web3 right now, where the technology is great, it has a lot of potential, but people aren't just going to go because it's Web3. They need to see
Right.
some type of impact to their daily life. And so that's
Exactly.
super interesting to see. I guess, talking about that, you have your latest venture, Arwen. So what was the motivation behind Arwen, and what has you excited about it?
Yeah, I guess one of the things that just excites me about it is like I do feel like it's different. It's I guess the high level description is it's kind of like a hybrid between like LinkedIn and like Upwork in terms of the pain point. We've mainly been working with contractors since we kind of got going in January, and we just had a lot of frustrations and pain points tied to actually finding good freelancers, and we went through some bad experiences where we were on a few different platforms, messaging 30 different people, and went with someone and ended up not being a good fit, and then starting over. So this would be more of like a network approach to the space in terms of um, more like you could see who I recommend for logo designer, or who the Airbnb founder recommends for a marketing person, or things like that. That would be the goal. Like at scale, to start, we're just going to launch it small, most likely just within the Y Combinator community, and just see if those network effects can last and create kind of retention and value there. That's kind of like the current thought process. So YC members would be able to see who each of them recommend, both for contractors or freelancers or agencies or dev shops, whatever it might be. So it's a little bit more of a human approach rather than it's still kind of a guessing game on some of these existing platforms where you just kind of a lot of them all have 5 stars, and it's tough to evaluate who's high quality. So that's the current approach, and yeah, we're excited about it. So we'll see.
Yeah, no, it's super exciting, and I think one of the benefits of remote in the last 2 years is just there's talent everywhere, and you have access to that talent.
Right.
So it's never been a better time to be a contractor or freelancer. But like you mentioned, those platforms to connect people they're there, but it's not specialized towards that.
Right.
So definitely, I think it's a big opportunity, and as we go into this remote first world, I think there's a lot of potential there. So super excited to see what happens with the product.
Yeah. I'll keep you posted, but I'll send you a link to the beta. Right now, we're just kind of invite only and just beta testing. Arwen.fyi is the current website, but hoping for a broader launch sometime later this year. But it all depends. But I think it's another realm where like it's an exciting industry and space in terms of, like you mentioned, even since COVID, there's just been so many more freelancers and contractors, but the majority of the U.S. workforce is expected to freelance by 2028. So it's
Wow.
it's a lot of changes that are all happening kind of now in terms of it's still an exciting realm.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Landon, for coming onto the podcast. I really loved hosting you, and I think it was a great conversation. So thank you so much once again.
Definitely. Thanks for having me, and look forward to checking it out.